All right. All right. Yeah. Hello, everybody. It is 3:30, which of course means it is time for one of our after-school science shows here at the Headwaters Science Center. I can't say after school again, right? Because school started. Although it's MEA weekend, so I didn't have school today. Afternoon science shows, afternoon STEM shows. And so it's been a busy day here at the Science Center. I haven't really had a whole lot of chance to plan a whole big show for you guys, but there was some kind of interesting news that came out just a couple days ago here. For those of you who have been, following us, following kind of science news around Minnesota for the last few months, one of the things you probably would have seen is that Minnesota, the Science Museum of Minnesota has been trying to establish a state fossil for Minnesota. And so state fossils are something that most states have. It's like us and like Indiana and like one other state that are the only ones that don't have an established state fossil. And so Science Museum of Minnesota has been trying to rectify that. And so they've been hosting a like polling kind of voting system over the last couple months on their website to pick a fossil that they are then going to nominate to the state legislature here in Minnesota. And I would assume it'll probably pass relatively easily, and then we'll have a new state fossil. And so I think we'll swap over quick here to the React screen. And we'll just take a quick look at kind of what some of the candidates were, because that's kind of interesting to think about, too, is who some of the candidates were here. And so Endoceros is one that did not do very well in the voting, unfortunately. It's one of my personal favorites, to be honest, because Endoceros is actually a fossil that we have here at the Headwaters Science Center. We have some Endoceros. And so what they are is kind of this, they're a cephalopod, they're like a squid thing. And so the shells in particular are something that you can actually find quite often in Minnesota, particularly in the southern part of the state. And so it's one that we actually have here. If you ever come and visit us here in person, you can go up and up by the bathrooms on the top floor, we have an Endoceros, little kind of table thing that actually has several Endoceroses in it. Stromatolites, also very, very cool. Stromatolites are fossilized blue-green algae, which are kind of interesting. I said they a lot of times just get kind of treated like a rock. Like I said, they call them Mary Ellen Jaspers, but really they are fossilized. I said it's algae. And we actually sell these in the gift shop here. This is another thing that's very, very common around Minnesota. Like I said, to the point that we just like sell them in our gift shop here at the Science Center. You can get a stromatolite, some fossilized algae. The Squalocorax actually is one that I was not very familiar with before this, but it's a type of shark. And what you'll notice immediately is that a lot of the stuff that we're looking at is stuff that was living underwater at the time that it was occupying this area, because Minnesota was underwater until relatively recently. Castoroides ohioensis is a big beaver species. So probably looked and acted very similar to what like a modern beaver does, but was substantially bigger. Modern beaver, how heavy is a modern beaver? It's a good question. Obviously, a species that is very relevant to Bemidji, kind of our city animal already, is the beaver. So can weigh up to, talking 50, 60 pounds for a beaver. Second largest rodent in the world, the modern beaver. But Castoroides is a genus of beavers that could get to be like 200 plus pounds. Like they were substantially bigger. They're kind of an ice age thing. This trilobite here, again, one that would have been an underwater critter at the time that it was living. See if I can even put that genus together. Dictylocephalus, something head, because cephalus is head. I don't know what the Dikel is though. But again, one that's even has Minnesotensis in its species name, so presumably it's very signature to Minnesota. Bison antiquus, kind of the same boat as Castoroides, where it's an animal that is very similar to a modern animal. In this case, the modern bison looks and acts pretty much the same, except it's quite a bit bigger than what modern bison are. Homotherium, a saber-toothed cat. If you have more interest in that, Carl did a show on the various types of saber-toothed cats couple weeks ago now. You can probably go back and find that on our YouTube channel. He talks a little bit about homotheriums there. The Terminaris robusta is crocodilian, and they're cool, but honestly, there's something I kind of more associate with South Dakota more so than I do Minnesota, to be honest. And then finally, we have the Colombian Mammoth, which again, a very cool animal, but something that has a very big range, very big animal, and something that maybe isn't quite as directly like Minnesota associated than some of the other ones are. And so, like I said, they actually just finished doing these polls, doing these voting just a couple days ago, and the thing that actually ended up winning was the Castoroides, the giant beaver, which I'm happy to see. That's actually the one I voted for. But I think what we'll do here is we'll swap over to a YouTube video that PBS put together earlier this year, actually, that is actually about Castoroides. And so we're going to watch this video. And like I said, I honestly don't know a ton about Castoroides. Like, I've never done a lot of direct research onto them myself, so I'm learning a little bit here too. Everything I've ever learned about them is just that they're a big beaver that lived in the Ice Age, and that's about it. So, like I said, I'm going to be learning a little bit here too. We'll learn together a little bit about, like I said, what is probably going to be Minnesota's new state fossil here. And so, make sure everything's in order here, and then we'll get started.
A little over 10,000 years ago, North America was home to the biggest beaver that ever existed. And yes, I know I talk to you all the time about giant extinct animals like the biggest frog and the longest snake and the hugest dinosaurs. But it's important to me personally that you understand how big this beaver was. It was more than twice as heavy and many, many times taller and longer than a modern beaver. It rivaled the size of a small black bear. Its name was Castoroides, and of course it's extinct now because you would definitely know if it was still around. But in the not too distant past, this giant rodent lived as far north as Alaska and the Yukon Territory, and as far south as Florida. And ancient beavers used to be a lot more diverse. For example, not all beavers...
And that was one thing I was going to say. I'm glad he's talking about this like extra diversity in beavers, is because when he talks about Castoroides, he's not talking about a specific species, he's talking about this whole genus of now extinct beavers. And so the one that is specifically the one that is becoming Minnesota's state fossil is Castoroides ohioensis, which maybe there's a range map for that. Let's look that up. Yeah, not really. Said I know some of the material that Science Museum of Minnesota put out said they had found him in St. Paul, and I know they have a skeleton of one at the Science Museum of Minnesota too. There's one in the little size scale there. There's one on the top floor in the Mississippi River Gallery.
Were swimmers. There were also terrestrial beavers that dug burrows.
But more of a uniquely like Midwestern one, not specifically Minnesota, but kind of a Midwestern one.
And twisty tunnels. So why are we left with just two species today, the American and the Eurasian beavers? And why isn't one of them the giant beaver? Well, the answer to both questions might involve behavior. Castoroides stuck around for about 1 million years. And just like modern beavers, it was semi-aquatic. It lived both on the land and in the water. The difference is that today's beavers do a pretty special thing, one that the giant beaver probably didn't or couldn't do. And that may have been its undoing. Beavers make up a family of rodents called the Castoroides, and so far about 30 genera have been identified in the fossil record. Scientists think beavers originally evolved in North America toward the end of the Eocene epoch, with their earliest known species scampering around Wyoming about 35 million years ago. There's been some debate about what its niche was, but it might have been semi-aquatic. And by the early Oligocene epoch, fossils from China tell us that beavers were quick to establish themselves in Eurasia. Between about 35 and 24 million years ago, different lineages of specialized beavers started to appear. For example, one group was mostly fossorial. They were digging animals. We know this in part because they had classic burrowing traits, like big forelimbs and front claws, as well as a short tail and neck. And many would have even used their teeth for digging too. Take Paleocaster, a small beaver from what's now Nebraska. During the Oligocene and Miocene epochs, it made huge spiral dens in the earth. Then, those burrows filled in with sediment, which solidified, leaving trace fossils called devil's corkscrews, which we've actually done a whole episode on.
I was gonna say, because I didn't particularly remember what made devil's corkscrews, but as soon as I saw that graphic of the beaver like tunnel, I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, it's interesting that he's talking about this like diversification that happens with them. This is something we've touched on a couple times with a couple of these videos too, is that when something kind of new comes onto the scene, in a relatively short amount of time, you generally see like a ton of diversification like within that group. So you see this like huge diversification that happens, and then usually pretty shortly thereafter you see a big extinction that happens among those things too, as you know, the new group kind of tries to find like the niches it can fit into. You see kind of experimenting with a whole bunch of different niches, and like I said, diversifying into a bunch of different species that, you know, most of which just die off and you never hear about them. Like I said, something like 90+% of the species that have ever existed on Earth have gone extinct. And like I said, a lot of it is like, oh yeah, there was, you know, this other beaver that existed that, you know, didn't build dams and it just didn't work and it died. And so there's a lot of stories like that. That's most animals.
Now, the digging beavers stayed pretty small, only measuring about 20 to 30 centimeters long, and they tended to live in open habitats, places where trees and woody plants weren't really common, which wouldn't have worked out so well for modern beavers whose diets include a lot of wood. They are part of another important beaver subgroup, one that evolved by the end of the Oligocene. Unlike Paleocaster and its burrowing cousins, these animals were semi-aquatic. Paleontologists think that the common ancestor of Castoroides and living beavers was a semi-aquatic woodcutter that lived in the early Miocene 20 to 24 million years ago. And some of the semi-aquatic beavers were probably good at burrowing as well as swimming, just like today's beavers are. And while experts aren't sure if Castoroides dug burrows, they know it was a swimmer. The oldest fossils of this giant beaver that we know of come from Florida, and they're between 1.6 million and 1 million years old. Back then, Florida was a combination of mixed tree woodlands and forested swamps. But wetlands weren't limited to the American South. In the giant beaver's heyday, the ice sheets of the northern hemisphere expanded and retreated multiple times. And it looks like the giant beaver came and went with those warm periods. So when the ice sheets advanced, places like Yukon Territory became cold, dry grasslands. But during the warmer interglacial periods, forests bounced back. And the water from melting ice sheets produced wetlands up north. The fossil record shows that Castoroides repeatedly invaded the Arctic during those warmer, wetter periods, which makes sense because it was clearly built for a semi-aquatic lifestyle. It had relatively short legs and big back feet that were probably webbed, but on land it would have had a pretty awkward walk. And by awkward, I mean probably adorable. Because, I mean, the thing was big, up to 2.5 meters long and weighing about 100 kilograms. Luckily, Castoroides could monitor its surroundings without leaving the water. Like hippos, crocodiles, and modern beavers, its eyes were near the top of its skull. This allowed it to look out for predators on land while staying safe in the water. So Castoroides sounds a lot like modern beavers, and fossils show that it lived alongside them.
So one of the things that's kind of interesting with this graphic is, you know, at first glance, this is like a big one and a little one, but if you look at the tail, you'll notice that this one has kind of a modern beaver tail, and this one has not that, kind of a more pokey long tail, which maybe it's just the angle, but maybe Castoroides didn't have the big beaver tail.
The modern American beaver. Remains of both species sometimes appear at the same dig sites. So why aren't the giant beavers still around? Like all rodents, Castoroides had big incisors on its upper and lower jaws that never stopped growing. Rodents constantly gnaw on things to keep these teeth from getting too long. And Castoroides had incisors that were bigger and curvier than those of living beavers. The giant beaver's incisors could grow to be over 20 centimeters long, but they didn't have the chisel-like tips that modern beavers have. With their shorter, sharper teeth, today's beavers have no trouble chopping down trees, which makes them excellent landscapers as well as builders. With mud and logs, they build sophisticated lodges. The ones they use in winter are especially good at retaining heat, even though they have air vents. And their dams are also just really impressive. A beaver dam can be anywhere from 1 meter to 850 meters long, and the tallest are 5 meters high. And it's hard to overstate just how much these structures deeply affect the environments around them. That's what makes American and Eurasian beavers textbook examples of ecosystem engineers. An ecosystem engineer is any organism that physically changes its habitat in a way that affects other species by altering the availability of certain resources. And beaver dams do just that. They can change the flow of streams and rivers, and often cause ponds to form, creating habitats for fish, amphibians, and other creatures. Plus, beavers also leave their mark on forests. Some beavers cut down trees as far as 200 meters away from their home pond. This has a huge influence on which plants grow where. Now, the two modern beavers belong to the genus Castor, which likely evolved sometime in the past 10 million years. And their dam and lodge building behaviors may have evolved as a way for them to survive hard winters.
I wonder what castor means, because obviously it's the same root word as Castoroides. Oh, not Castro. Just fully means beaver? Okay. Oh, that's Spanish, though. Let's see. Castor is a star. Let's see what castor is when it's a star. So a lot of the times it's, you know, based off of Greek or Latin etymology. Oh, like Castor and Pollux. Okay. I wonder why you would name a genus of rodents after Castor in the Castor and Pollux story. Maybe they didn't. Maybe I'm just wrong. Let's see. Etymology. Beaver, 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 beaver. This is all about the word beaver, not the word castor. Oh, there we go. Castor translates as beaver. I guess that makes sense because there is Eurasian beavers too, so people in Greece probably just had a name for those, and they just used that. That makes sense, I guess. It's not that fun, but it makes sense.
In higher latitudes. So because both species are builders, some experts think that the very first beaver dams and lodges might have been built around this time. But it looks like woodworking wasn't really Castoroides' thing. Based on a study of stable isotope signatures found in its teeth and bones, which can help tell us what an animal ate, it looks like Castoroides mostly ate freshwater plants, like water lilies, pondweeds, and sedges. So diet-wise, it had more in common with today's muskrat than it did with either living beaver. And if Castoroides didn't chow down on logs, then it probably wasn't using those things to make lodges or dams. And that would have left the giant beaver at the mercy of Earth's changing climate. When the most recent glacial period ended around 11,700 years ago, things got warmer and drier, and the swamps and lakes that Castoroides depended on became more scarce. Slowly but surely, its range got smaller and smaller. It was eventually driven out of the Great Plains as wetlands and forests gave way to arid grasslands. Meanwhile, in Florida, there was a temporary rise in scrubland and prairie habitats, which coincided with the giant beaver's disappearance there. The last known population of Castoroides died out in the Great Lakes region about 10,000 years ago. But the Eurasian and American beavers are still with us. Maybe because, unlike Castoroides, they can customize their habitats by building lodges and dams. So, when the climate changes, or when resources grow scarce, they're less vulnerable than some other species. Like its giant Ice Age colleagues, such as the Colombian mammoth, the short-faced bear, and other mega mammals, Castoroides had some impressive proportions. But today's beavers have engineering on their side.
And something that has to do with like those proportions, like we see this with a lot of animals. You know, we've talked about megafauna in the past when we were doing the Ice Age tier list. We talked about this a little bit. There's a lot of animals that go extinct, you know, 10, 12,000 years ago, specifically in North America, that were really, really big mammals. And part of that is it coincides pretty well with the prevalence of humans coming to North America. Humans love hunting big mammals. It's kind of what we do. But also, like I said, it's talking about associating with climate change here, too. And those big proportions are something... Big proportions, really robust builds are something that is really helpful in a really cold climate. Being spherical, basically, is about the best shape you can be as far as retaining heat. That's why you see things like beavers to this day are, as they get bigger, they get rounder. You know, it's something that you can, if you're somebody who's ever looked at like beaver pelts, like the really nice ones, like the really big beavers, are literally a circle. And so as the climate gets warmer, all of a sudden being like that big and bulky isn't necessarily as selected for and isn't as beneficial. Like I said, we still do see some things that retain it, like beavers. But for beavers, you know, they, you know, still live in a cold climate, and the fact that they are mostly aquatic plays a big role in that as well, where they have kind of different temperature requirements than what something like a mastodon would have, that is spending all of its time out of the water. But something that he hasn't talked about yet, he might yet. We got a couple more minutes in this video. that he hasn't mentioned yet is if people were hunting these things. Because, I mean, we know that modern beavers have been hunted a lot in their day, specifically for their fur, but, you know, they're also a pretty fatty, probably pretty nutritious thing if you really get into them. But the fur is the thing that, like, historically has been a big industry for with beavers. And I wouldn't be surprised if Castoroides fell prey to kind of a similar type of thing there, where we had, like I said, humans arriving on the continent and messing them up a little bit, like they did with so many of these other big mammals.
And whether you're big or small, if you can shape the world around you, it could mean the difference between survival and extinction.
Oh, I guess it was done. Or no. It's a postscript here, maybe.
Would like to thank these researchers for their help with this episode. Thank you so much. And if you want to know more about the beavers that are still around, check out Animal Wonders, hosted by Jesse Knudsen Castaneda. Every week on Animal Wonders, Jesse features different animals and shares what it's like to all about Huckleberry's story and how he's grown from a tiny fluff to a great big member of the Animal Wonders team. There's a link in the description.
All right, yeah. That's nothing more about Castoroides. But yeah, like I said, it's something to always be remembering anytime we're looking at any of these like Ice Age, like North American critter, like extinction things. Like I said, you'll notice there's a lot of them that are going to extinct in that like 15, 12, 10,000 years ago span. And like I said, it a lot of times coincides with humans arriving in the area and hunting them to extinction, kind of in tandem, obviously, with climate change issues that were coming along with the end of the glacial period there, where you have different selection pressures happening all of a sudden. But again, just remembering that humans are always a factor, basically, especially when it comes to megafauna. But anyway, I think we are going to call it a wrap there. Like I said, we're pretty busy here at the Science Center. Kind of snuck out here to shoot this quick, but thank you guys for watching. The Headwaters Science Center is open. We're open 7 days a week right now. So we're open Monday through Friday, 9:30 to 5. And then we are also open on Sundays from 1 to 5. So come by after lunch on Sundays. Event we have coming up here on the 29th, I think it is. So a week from today. I think it's the 29th. Might be the 30th. I think it's the 29th, though. Is the dinosaur painting night that one of our educators, Carl, is going to be hosting. And oh, I actually did bring it over. I did think about it. If you watched yesterday, you saw part of the stream was me doing a little bit of painting on a little model that I was doing. And so for this is going to be presumably like a repeat event, something that we're going to continue to do on I think the plan currently is on a monthly basis, is basically hosting one of these nights kind of towards the end of the month where you come in, you buy a 3D printed extinct creature, and then you do some painting with it. So we provide the paint, we provide the brushes, we provide the critter. It's a $15 entry fee. It's limited to 20 slots. I think it's limited to 20, and there's a few left. It's not empty, but there's enough left that if you call soon, you can probably still get in. So yeah, if that sounds interesting to you, this month is Spinosaurus. Instead, I don't know if it's a secret or not what the one for next month is, so I'll hold off on revealing it. That's Carl's decision to make. But the hint I'll give you is that it's not a dinosaur next month. But yeah, if that sounds interesting to you, like I said, you can sign up. You can either call us at just at the Headwaters Science Center, 218-444-4472. Check that quick. 444-4472. Yep, 4444-HSC. Or if you come in anytime we're open and ask at the front desk, we can sign you up there too. So yeah. Otherwise, I said thank you all for watching. And tomorrow, what is tomorrow? Tomorrow's Saturday. Tomorrow's a snake feeding day. So tomorrow at 3:30, we'll be feeding or offering food to all 5 of our snakes. So that sounds interesting to you. Tune back in here at 3:30, and it'll probably be Ridley on camera tomorrow. Probably me behind.